Recently I've been talking about empaths coming out of repression. Um, if you look up empaths, it'll say it's like 1 to 2% of the population, which is low compared to highly sensitive persons or people, which is like 15 to 20%. But the reason that I'm using the word empath or empathic is because in spirituality, you often hear people who say that they're sensitive to the emotions of others, and they'll often use that term. Okay, so that doesn't mean that that's the term. It's just one of the terms that gets used, roughly pointing to a sensitivity to emotion that might be heightened for certain people. Sensitivity to others' emotions. Now, highly sensitive person is another example. As I just said, if you want to read about it, if you don't know about it, and this is not a diagnosis. I'm not diagnosing people. Not. I'm actually. This is coming from uh, the awakening and working with people who are in the process of awakening and having to deal with things like trauma and repression that naturally come up. And so, somebody may not say this to you since it's coming from a different perspective. It's not coming from textbooks. I actually have to look up the insights that happen for me. I have to look up, what is this? It's like you see the thing first. In direct experience, you always see like the programming of something uh, within yourself, or someone discovers it within themselves. Like they literally see, oh, dad's angry and I can't. And then a shutdown around anger in the system, for example, where they have to repress or suppress that. That's what you see in direct experience. You don't see things like depression or highly sensitive person or empath. Those are the mind's constructs. Uh, the mind comes in later when it after experience and puts these tags on things. So just to again remind you, I didn't come to any of this by reading any of it, and none of it. So I know that there's Myers-Briggs. That's how much I read about this stuff. In other words, it's a personality test, and in that there are some categories of personality types that would kind of fall into the intuitive, sensitive, empathic aspects of us. So it's touching upon it. So again, if you're someone who's taken that personality test, you might just go back and look again to see if some of those qualities are there, identified for you there. But then there's also just the empath, this label, which is not necessarily within any personality test. It's just a label that floats around, and some people really identify with it. It's being really empathic, or obviously sensitive. One of the qualities of it is being sensitive to the emotions of others. And then the highly sensitive person, and I've heard of this before, but again, this is not where this comes from. This doesn't come from me reading about these things. I actually had to go, somebody asked me a question yesterday after watching the empaths coming out of repression, essentially video, or something like that. Someone asked me in the comments, what about highly sensitive person? And although I've been aware of that, again, I don't get my information from the internet. It comes from direct experience, so I have to go back to the internet, and I did. I was like, okay, what again is a highly sensitive person? Oh, yeah, that definitely can be repression based or involve repression. I mean, as soon as I read it, I was like, this, because remember, I'm coming from direct experience. Like, first of all, my own experience growing up highly sensitive, very, very sensitive. I've shared that before. Like, if someone was angry around me, my dad was even not even yelling at me, just a certain tone. It would be absolutely devastating to me. And this is probably one of the reasons why I'm a spiritual teacher, because growing up that way is challenging when human emotions are, and of course I went into drug addiction for 20 some odd years, so I didn't have to deal with a range of emotions. So very sensitive person to the extent that's what I am, that level. always been sensitive. So I can speak about this because of my own direct experience. I can't speak for everybody's experience, but I feel like if we can just let the labels go for a moment. See, because if you're listening to this and you're coming from a diagnosis and you really just believe that diagnosis, for example, or if you come saying, really believing that you're a highly sensitive person, it's fine, but it's mind. And there's only so much the mind can give us. I want to talk to you about your experience now. And so when someone asks me, can a highly sensitive person have repression, and that could be one of the reasons why the sensitivity creates such suffering? The answer is yes, or possibly. It's just you can't generalize. But I'll tell you this. Even after asking that question, my first thing was like, well, I'll just look it up. It's like HSP, anger repression. Boom. It was right there. But I already knew the answer. Is it yes? Quite possibly, because that's what I'm referring to. The sensitivity to one's own emotions, but also really other people's emotions, shows up in a lot of different people. And some people have really attached themselves to this one, highly sensitive person. But I'm asking you to let go of it for a moment and just hear me. Even if you have to take a few breaths and just watch your breath. Get out of your mind. Because even though I'm talking, I'm not really coming from the mind, believe it or not. I'm just reporting on my experience as directly as I can. Of course, the mind is involved, but because that's how you communicate. But I'm reporting right from the front lines of my own insights and experience of deep somatic inquiry on chronic pain that healed because the anger repression that was at the root of it was healed. That's where I'm coming from. And being a very sensitive person, growing up that way. So just hear me. Get out of your mind for a second and just watch your breath, or just sit here kind of in silence and really present and clear and listen, please. Now, start with a little bit of mind. Just understanding first that trauma is, in case you don't know, it's not just someone neglecting you. It's not just one-time event necessarily. You hear about the trauma like, oh yeah, she was sexually abused at 8, as events, which can happen. Or dad hit me when I was 6, an event. But developmental trauma, it happens over time. And it isn't always about like someone physically abusing you over time, although that can happen too, for sure. And of course that affects the development of that child into adult. But the word trauma is elusive and you have to be careful with it because it's so broad and everybody's experience is very different. And trauma is really subjective. So for example, you could just be living with a parent over time who just doesn't show love or give you that much attention. Not necessarily neglectful, and basic needs are taken care of. Food, water, shelter. You can have all of that, but then there can just be this sense with this one parent or both parents that they just didn't. It's like I'm invisible. Like there's something wrong with me as a child because they don't show up. They're not present. I don't even know if they love me. They do, but this is what people go through with developmental trauma. It can be very painful. It happens over time. So when you think about that, and then the unconsciousness of humans, we have to talk about that. Unconsciousness. So parents that are unconscious. Meaning, they're not awake to who they are. They're in the ego consciousness with all of its insecurities and deficiencies and unresolved traumas and, avoidance of emotion, all the stuff that comes with unconsciousness. Those people are raising us, and we may be unconscious raising children now. That adds to it because the unconsciousness of parents is what easily results in a child believing that they're unloved or unlovable or not good enough or something like that. Like a deep core woundedness easily happens over time, even with parents who do not hit you or sexually abuse you. How do I know this? Because I've worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of people over the years, one-on-one, going into the depths of consciousness and somatic experience and discovering what's there. And what's there is this, among other things, this over time, the unconsciousness of my mom and dad, whoever the client is, created a deep sense of core woundedness within me. Like, I'm just not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm not enough. I'm not loved. That is universal. And I mean universal, because I've worked with people just in almost every continent, I'm assuming, in so many countries. And it's just universal that if you grow up with unconscious parents over time, you develop this sense of like, there's something wrong with me, what I call a deficiency story. But it goes deeper than that. And so if you bring this high sensitivity into the mix, the child, or an empathic capacity to feel other people's emotions, that compounds the issue of just otherwise unconscious parents. Because of when I say our, I mean those of us who are very sensitive, our relationship to other people's emotions. We're on high alert. And maybe some of us were born this way, There's a case to be made for that. Or that we inherit some of this through our DNA, like intergenerationally. I don't think we know and understand all of it. And what I would say is, yeah, it's good to go try to understand what the research knows. But what I'm inviting you to do is to go into direct experience and discover for yourself your own operating system. And I don't mean thinking about who you are. I don't mean that at all. I mean like inquiring into who you think you are and seeing these patterns firsthand within your experience, including the repression of emotion within your own experience. You repressing. Just like all I did was type in, for the first time I researched HSP, highly sensitive person. And I just put the word repression on there, and it's like a full articles. This has been studied, and I didn't know. I just didn't know because I don't get my information from the internet. When I go on the internet, it's like an after the fact, just like this question. So that's why I trust my experience, because it's not filtered through all the informational, the veil of information, the knowledge of man, which is thick with like just identification too. And like, look, let me just explain a little bit about this, because if you can go into more direct experience, you may be able to heal. I had to go into direct experience to heal. In other words, years ago, I left behind the addict identity and the diagnosis of like my physical conditions. I had to let go of all that and go into direct experience, into the emotional experience, the mind-body connection from within and awareness. And that has given me more healing than any of those diagnoses. Much more healing. It's not even close. So I really want you to hear that piece of it, because I just know that as I share this, many of you or some of you are going to come out of the closet and say, yes, I'm a highly sensitive person. And that's fine. And then you're going to go research that, which is also fine. But remember, I'm talking about direct experience. I'm saying, are you ready to examine this? Because whatever sensitivity I grew up with definitely developed into the repression of anger and other emotions. I know that now, not from the internet. I know that from my direct experience. So, in case you don't know, the Kiloby inquiries are a method that you can actually uncover the unconsciousness around this. And I don't just mean sit with some sensation until you feel angry. That's actually not very skillful, really. Because this is really often buried, repressed anger, for example. Just so you know, before I start talking about this more, I want you to hear this part of it. The reason that I'm talking this way is because the KI, Kiloby inquiries, literally have found a way to unearth not just buried emotion, but the programming that tries to keep it down. Very specific mental programming that's unconscious that's literally, as you're watching this, if you have it, it's operating right now as your personality, but you can't see it. So it might show up as being sensitive or some other way, but it's really hidden from us. So just know that I'm coming from out of an experience of spending many months in deep repression inquiry, not on the internet. And in that deep repression inquiry, I saw the programming of repression. I saw it not only in the body, felt it, but I saw it, how the unconscious mind, and I inquired into that, so that repression mechanism is weak or not even there anymore. That's where I'm coming from. So I want you to hear this message really from presence as much as possible, just being here now. Get out of your head for a moment. Highly sensitive people, like empaths, may experience that when you're around other people, especially people who are angry, but also other emotions, that you feel that. And you may have a history of like pulling away from those people, which is quite natural to protect yourself. And this sensitivity may have even served you well in certain ways, like in spirituality, to be sensitive and compassionate, for example. It may have helped you go inward in meditation, in somatic work, the sensitivity to experience. It's not all a bad thing at all. There's lots of great artists, I would think, that are very sensitive and empathic, like maybe some of the greatest artists. I think of Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, and many others throughout history. So don't want to vilify it, but let's look at it from the experience of just relationship and the emotional landscape of relationship. There's a lot of suffering for highly sensitive people. And I don't have to find out whether I fit into that category to know that I know what sensitivity is. A high degree of sensitivity. So, again, after going into inquiry, what I saw for myself and what you may discover is early on, whether we're born with a sensitivity or whether it develops, in the end, it doesn't really matter because we have to deal with it in this life. It's part of how we show up. And you can get really busy studying the roots of it, but then it still operates. That's what I've learned about human conditioning. You can know a lot about it. You could be the best therapist in the world. You could be the most trained doctor around all this and still be very unconscious and repressed. Because this is not about book knowledge. I'm asking you to pay attention, to be present, to be mindful to your reactions to people who are angry or expressing other emotions that are uncomfortable. To be aware of that, but to be more than mindful of it. To get off the internet, get into your experience, and start to learn inquiry to discover what's going on in your programming. What's going on in the unconscious for you when you're around people like that? So what I discovered is from an early age, so I had developmental trauma, if you want to put a label on it. And it had to do with really the span of several years being bullied. 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, just over time. And growing up gay is also traumatic. And being bullied for being gay. And then some other stuff that happened at home that I don't always talk about publicly because it involves people that deserve some confidentiality. So through the years for myself, I didn't realize it. I was repressing anger. I didn't do it consciously. As a little kid, I don't remember anger except for like one time. And for some reason, this system here learned that you just don't feel and express anger because it isn't peaceful. That was part of my ego structure. And I learned also not to express anger by looking at other angry people. So the bullies who I could feel their anger at me, and other people who didn't like gay people coming on TV. I'm a little kid. I can feel the hatred of people who hate gay people. I can feel their anger. So, being sensitive to all that, I unconsciously stuffed it down. So that repression is like not allowing anger into your consciousness. It's not like it's here and I'm going to push it down. That happens too. That's suppression, more deliberate suppression. Repression is an unconscious, involuntary act, really. And this is all research. You can go, after I discovered repression, I researched it, and they say these things about it. It's also my experience that anger wasn't allowed to a great degree. Now, through the years, I would get angry, but it would be more like a volcanic eruption after repressing and suppressing it for a long time. Like not speaking up, not setting any boundaries, letting people do what they want to do, even if I was against it, like sometimes even going along with it, people pleasing. And then suddenly I get to a situation where that erupts like a volcano and I just get really angry. Like it just goes left field. So just few and far between, but that would happen. But most of the time, the repression of anger showed up for me again, not as volcanic eruption at the finally erupting after holding it in. The repression had so many other unconscious aspects to it that you may or may not realize is happening for you, which is again like a shutdown around people or a pulling away from people who are angry. And I would say to myself, they're angry. It would never make it about me, really, other than I'm sensitive. They're angry. I'm just sensitive. And therein lies the unconsciousness of the highly sensitive person who isn't tuned into their own repressions. There's your unconsciousness right there if you fit the bill. This is one of the pieces of it, is that we pull on these labels for ourselves, like I'm empathic, I'm highly sensitive. And even though that's true in our experience, it's one way that we hide our own anger repression from ourselves. It's like the conscious mind gloms onto a label or an identity or a way of understanding yourself. But what's under all that need to understand yourself is an emotional thing. Much more a deeper layer than what the mind thinks. This is like your nervous system, right? The nervous system of a highly sensitive person is what I'm talking about. And so again, repression hides from us. So when we're around other people, if we're very sensitive people, when we're around others, again, we're going to be focusing on their anger. That's a shadow for us. It helps us stay repressed. And to the operating system, it helps us stay safe. That's what the unconscious programming ends up saying, essentially, is that by pulling away from people, I'm staying safe because they're angry and I'm sensitive to their anger. There's something else going on, though, for many of us with that, which is that we, again, have repressed anger within our experience. Again, you don't have to believe me. I'm not asking you to believe me. If you need to verify it, just go research that. If your mind needs verification, research it. I mean, it wasn't hard for me to find the link between HSP and emotional or anger repression. If you need that, go, but don't go yet. I want you just to hear this. If you verify it, or whether you don't need verification, hear me now about experience. Do you have the experience of being around angry people or emotional people and pulling away? Just pulling away, again, out of self-protection. That pulling away, it looks like it's about self-protection, and it is, but it's also how the repression operates unconsciously, controlling our life, as Carl Jung says. The unconscious controls our life until we make it conscious. That's what's happening in that pulling away from angry people. The unconscious repression is also acting there. The repression of our own anger, we can't see it. It's a shadow. It's almost like an energetic shadow. If you understand shadows, just hear me out for a second. There are aspects of ourselves that we have pushed down, again, repressed or suppressed, aspects, like natural aspects of ourselves. Anger is actually a natural human emotion, one of the primary emotions. We probably needed it. No, we did need it, along with aggression, to survive as a species. Can you imagine early humans not bringing anger and aggression online, or fear, somehow suppressing that? How are they going to survive when they're being attacked by neighboring tribes, or by animals, or by someone within their own social structure? Anger is a resource for us. Now, in our civilized world, there's not such a place for it, but it's when we deny that resource within ourselves, some bad stuff can happen. And let me talk just briefly about the bad stuff. Again, if you need verification, go to the science. But repressing anger and other primary emotions results in, like in my case, a serious chronic pain issue or chronic pain, physical disease. I mean, you can just go research it. Anger repression or emotional repression and cancer. Emotional repression and chronic pain. Emotional repression and irritable bowel syndrome. Emotional repression and, the list goes on. Asthma. Allergies. That's one piece of the puzzle as why we're getting sick and dying early. You can research emotional repression and premature death rate. Emotional repression and addiction. Emotional repression and bipolar. Emotional repression, the list goes on and on. It's all there for you if you need to verify it. But I'm asking you to, once you verify it, that satisfies the mind, come back to hear me on the direct experience piece. Because even if you understand that and it's verified, that shadow will still operate. You'll still repress anger. Chances are reading that research is not enough. Not nearly enough. That's the conscious adult mind thinking and studying. That's all that is. And it's powerfully helpful. It's not enough because it's knowledge. Knowledge only takes us so far. With inquiry and coming to awareness, we're not going to the realm of knowledge. We're going to the realm of experience. And we're pulling up the mind-body connection in awareness, which we call the Velcro effect, which is how the mind connects with the body. And it does that in very unconscious ways. So for example, body, anger, the mind, unconsciously, if there's repression, has a very elaborate system of thoughts, programs, a network of unconscious thoughts that keep that down. And they're very simple thoughts that you have difficulty accessing in awareness. They're things that, like a child would say, I can't. I have to hold it back. They'll hurt me if I'm angry. They won't love me. I'll be alone. Now, we may have some inkling of this programming, but a lot of it is just in the unconscious. And I didn't know this either. I want you to hear this piece of it so that you can stick to experience here. Because if you go off into the knowledge realm, you can really move away from experience. And then you can't heal once you do that. Once you get lost in the concepts, you can't. It's hard to heal. Because you have to have access to the unconscious mind and the emotions that are repressed. Information isn't going to do it for you. So how that showed up for me is the Kiloby inquiries were refined in a way that would prompt up the unconscious commands to repress emotion. There are unconscious commands in your nervous system. It's not a story. It's not so much a story like we think of in, oh, he's just in a story. Like he believes that story. This is more of a mechanism, unconscious mechanism, and it's operating continuously as your personality. That's why it's so hard to see in direct experience. It shows up as you. As the sensitive, quiet, whatever, you. The one that doesn't get angry or is against anger, you. Or against something like that. So being able to pull that up and unhook from that, anger and rage that was buried came to the surface. And it could only come to the surface by unhooking from the unconscious programming in the mind around that. deep inquiry around things that don't normally arise. These commands don't arise to us, they're unconscious. So by bringing them into awareness, again, in KI, we're unhooking from these repressions, and it's making changes, not only in our health, but in our relationship, our spiritual path, everything. Changes for the better. Because we're bringing something into awareness that we've pushed away all of our lives. So by pushing away that anger, a number of things happen for us. We push it down. Again, relationships are challenging then, because anyone who shows up with that energy, there's like a being repulsed by it. You don't realize yet you're repulsed by your own anger. That's the thing that I saw in direct experience. It has nothing to do really with other people. And from a non-dual sense, there are no other people. And I'm not saying that to like throw a big non-dual brick on this and just like go into the absolute. I'm really saying that that's the case. Like that there aren't any others. There's really no separate self and no separate others. There's just this consciousness. And so the consciousness divides itself off from itself in separation. One of the ways it does that is through this energetic shadowing, this repression. So the way that separation shows up for a sensitive person would be a sense of separation between myself and the people who are angry in the world, or overtly emotional, or something like that. There's a sense of separation that operates in your life. Like, it's not theoretical, it's experiential. So you really have to listen to this. You have to forget the knowledge and just look back at your life now, the past, and kind of from awareness, just observe how you operate and look to see whether you do pull yourself away from, not just in real life, so to speak, but like on the internet even, pulling away from people who show up as angry, right? It feels very natural and self-protective, but where is it coming from? It's not just coming from the sensitivity, and not everybody's traumatized and repressed. But when you add repression and trauma into a system or into experience that's already sensitive, then you've got a soup there that can lead to a lot of suffering in relationship, and then ultimately suffering in the physical. You know, like for me, pain, illness, mental health issues. Okay, so just notice, first of all, do you have that pattern in your life? That's all that you need to find. You don't really actually have to verify these HSP, highly intuitive, empathic. You can go there on the internet, but you have all the evidence just on the surface in your own life. And that's where I'm asking you to look. So one thing I'm inviting you to do, if you are a sensitive person, is from just now on today, for the next few days, just notice, or maybe the next few weeks, notice how you pull away from people who are angry or highly anxious or pulling away. Just notice that. And then notice when you pull away, I'm going to give you a few inquiries here to work with, just to see if the pulling away is coming not just from sensitivity, but from the repression of your own anger. So just take this, write this down, and it may be a new inquiry for you. I'm going to give you like a reverse inquiry. So next time you're around someone, either on the internet or in person, who's angry or is expressing an emotion that you feel repulsed by in some way, sensitive to, pull away, which is what you probably want to do. Just do that. But then don't wait long. Don't sit and go do something else. Go to a bedroom or a bathroom and sit quietly and pull that person up in your awareness. The memory of the person being angry or anxious, or let's just go with anger first. And then while you're looking at that person in awareness, and you can actually do it right now, if you see someone that you pulled away from, here's your inquiry. Anger is allowed here. Like in that relationship, you're looking at that person. Anger is allowed. Now, when you say that, be rooted in your body. Have awareness in your inner body and just listen to the inner body to see, first of all, is there a sensation that comes up in response when you say, like as if it's objecting to this. If you say, anger is allowed here, listen to the body. If you feel like a movement, contraction, tightness, or pain being activated by the inquiry, you're seeing evidence of repression. That's all it is this the evidence. It's not showing you the mental programming, perhaps yet, it may be. But as that sensation gets activated, just ask, what would this sensation say here? As I'm looking at this person who's angry, what would this sensation say if it had a voice around this inquiry, which is anger's allowed? And listen to see what the mind says, even if it just says no, as in no, it's not allowed, or something like that. Again, further evidence of repression there on the mind level, if you're able to pull that up. Another inquiry to do, just to detect whether there's evidence of repression, is it's okay that that person is angry. There's nothing wrong with that person's anger. And see again if there's some objection to that. Either mind and or body, an objection. Something that says no or indicates no. Again, evidence of repression. Now, at first glance, it still looks like in that inquiry, perhaps, that it's the other person's anger that you're objecting to. But there aren't any other people. And here's the thing, this is why the non-dual is so helpful. Because in the non-dual, you see through separation. When you're experiencing another person, you don't really experience it as a separate person. Now, when there's a repression, the separation can feel like it's there. And that's why I went into repression work, because it created an energetic sense of separation between me and people who were angry. But then working through that, clearly there isn't any separation. That was just an aspect that needed to be included in my own realization. It was a holdout. This anger repression was still a sense of separation on the energetic level. So when that gets seen through, again, there isn't any separation there. So what you're objecting to, whether you recognize it or not, is not just the anger in that person, but the anger within you that you rejected a long time ago. That's the repression, suppression. How do I know that? Because see, when I went into inquiry, I didn't just deal with other people's emotions. That's easy. I mean, from the consciousness says, I don't want to be around angry people. It's kind of that simple. I went into the unconscious and I found out that there's programming that was here that said, I don't want to feel and express my own anger. So while you're doing that inquiry with this person, just say this: I can feel and express my own anger to that person, or just feel and express it in their company. And then again, listen for a no. So as you do these inquiries, you start to recognize it's not really about the person or me, it's about anger. And that's the repression, suppression. So you start to discover that it's really not about people, it's about anger, no matter where it shows up, in other people or in me. And then that puts it on your side. And so KI has developed a way to work with the repression once you see it on your side. And that's what brings the clarity. Because as you come out of repression of that, the shadowing stops or highly slows down. In other words, you're not triggered in the same way by other people who are angry because you've dealt with your own buried anger or rage. This is really important work because so many of us who are empaths or highly sensitive people are on self-improvement paths, enlightenment paths, and we may not recognize that part of the reason that we're driven on the path is because of our relationship to anger and other emotions. They haven't been fully allowed in our own experience. When you're a kid and you're not able to access anger or other emotions, that's a part of yourself. so to speak, that is shut off, disowned. So, do you see why one of the reasons why we're on the self-improvement and the enlightenment path is we're looking for ourselves? Who am I? What am I? Why would we be looking for ourselves? Could it be partly because a part of ourself was left behind in childhood, shut down? So in adulthood, not only are we repulsed by or triggered by those who show up with that energy that we disowned, but the disowning of that energy is driving us to look for what we are in the world, not just in spirituality and self-improvement, but in the world. We're just looking for ourselves. And it's a very elusive thing. We keep chasing ourselves because we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking into future. One of the things about the non-dual realization is that you wake up to now, to your true nature here as awareness, and you start to realize that that was a mechanism of trying to, again, further escape emotions. This promise that I'm going to reach a place where I don't suffer anymore, or something like that. And that's really just another way of saying, can I find a way to really fully and finally bypass the anger? And awakening really doesn't work that way, I found, or the embodiment of it. You have to own the parts that you've been running from. Because if you don't, in some way they'll continue to create suffering in relationship, but also continue to sort of drive into this seeking mode of looking for yourself. As you start to embody and integrate these emotions that you've denied and repressed, suppressed within your own experience, it settles down that seeking because you're owning an aspect of yourself that you pushed away. And it helps to embody the awakening if you're on an awakening path. To embody that emotion further settles you into the deep sense of beingness here. See, presence. So it's very relevant on our paths. Even if you're not on a non-dual path, if you're on some self-improvement path, like you're looking for a better version of yourself in the future, instead of recognizing your true nature here now as presence, that still is partly driven by the developmental stuff that happened to you and the repression of an aspect of yourself. This is one of the reasons why you keep looking for yourself, because it's right here. You just haven't allowed it yet. As you start to allow these things that you've disowned, again, even on the self-improvement path, you're going to end up with a greater sense of well-being. Even if you're still seeking yourself, a greater sense of well-being and authenticity, for sure, if you can do this work. The reason I'm making such a big deal about it is because I don't think a lot of people know this. I mean, look, some do, but it's a really unconscious area for us. And if nobody said this to you, you know, kind of how it works, you just take a listen and see if it applies. See if it checks the boxes for you, like, oh, this could be happening for me. Now, when you discover it, what do you do about it? And then what I notice is people then will go back into mind. They'll go researching emotional repression to learn a bunch about it. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, the knowledge isn't going to help you here. It'll help in the sense it'll give you some context about what's happening to you. But knowledge isn't really transformational, not deeply, usually. So you're going to want to come back to some practice or method, or like the Kiloby inquiries or something like that, that truly prompts up this unconscious conditioning that represses, to transform through it. Transformation is different than information. Information just tells you things. Transformation changes you, shifts you into what you really are. It's a lived experience. So that's what I'm ultimately inviting you, not just to verify all this through a Google search, but verify it in your own direct experience through inquiry, that this is a pattern that's happening for you. Because I think you may find that this is actually a source of real suffering. And if you don't catch it early, it'd be like me. And by not catching it, it's more than just relationship thing. It's then concretized into physical pain or illness. And then it can sometimes feel too late, frankly, because once the physical has manifested, it has all the symptoms of that, the stress and all that. It's difficult at that point to go back into this repression. On top of a physical illness, now you're going to look into anger repression. I wouldn't suggest it. I did it, and there was a healing. And of course, if you just continue to dismiss what I'm saying, and that's fine too, you may find yourself there, and that may actually be a gift if you want to wait that long. You know, when you get the cancer diagnosis, then you become interested in this message. But I'm just saying, you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait. If you'll just hear this now, put the dots together, and start doing the work. We are doing this work in the Kiloby members area. So the Kiloby members area is a community, a social media community, where there are videos and meetings and writings that explain this work as it applies to many facets of life, but one of it is the repression facet of life. If you're interested, go to kiloby.com. To the top-down menu, it drops down, the drop-down menu, and then you'll find go to members area. If you're not ready for that, then just keep listening, because I think you'll hear more and more just listening to me. More of the boxes will be checked for you. And I realize that certain people are in kind of pre-contemplation. They're just listening. And they need to just keep listening unless they become ready for the real transformation. Now, be careful, because when people learn this about themselves, sometimes they go back to the same practices they've been doing for years. The problem with that is, if those practices would have worked, you wouldn't be resonating right now with this as much. It would have already taken care of the repression for you. So I had to give up every practice, essentially every practice that I was doing prior to the recognition of this repression, because none of them were actually bringing the repression to the surface. And it was a real soul searching. Like, I just couldn't, nothing was working, nothing. So these inquiries had to be developed in a way that would work on that. So just be careful going back to the same practices, because again, if they haven't lifted it, not going to lift it now, because there's a limitation to that modality, that way of inquiring or spiritual practice. The limitation is that it didn't show you this. So you're going to want to look for something that shows you this in your direct experience. And I don't just mean like bringing anger up, because if you can bring anger up, it's not repressed. I'm talking about something that's buried and it's very difficult to bring up. It's not something that just arises easily to awareness. If it did, you wouldn't be still repressed. So be very careful of the practices that you're choosing if you discover this, because I almost killed myself not having the right practices. Going back to some of the old practices, they didn't work. So the chronic pain continued, the repression stayed in place. It wasn't until developing the work in this new area that the healing happened. So just let my life be a living example of what it means to bypass. And then when you discover the bypass, go back to old practices that don't work. I'm just sharing you that you don't have to go that way. Like, you can actually learn practices that work. You don't have to go through all that. That's all I'm saying. See you all.